Buenos días a todos, a todas, quienes se conectan en este momento a nuestro canal de YouTube de FestiQ-Artetos. Mi nombre es Santiago Medina, soy integrante del Cuarteto Q-Arte y les doy muy especialmente la bienvenida a esta nueva cita virtual. Hoy con una invitada súper especial que nos alegramos tantísimo de tener. Se trata de la violinista Sharan Leventhal, que nos acompaña hoy desde Boston. Hoy vamos a estar hablando con Sharan de diversos temas porque su perfil es un perfil muy diverso, muy interesante. Entonces, pues estamos muy contentos de poder tener a Sharan con nosotros. Sharan, hi, thank you so much for being with us here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Como para saber un poquito, Sharan Leventhal es una violinista ampliamente reconocida que está basada en Estados Unidos. Ha girado por muchos continentes como solista, como música de cámara y como pedagoga. Ha creado una gran reputación a nivel internacional como representante de la música contemporánea y ha sido merecedora de múltiples premios y estímulos de muy prestigiosas instituciones para los trabajos que desarrolla. Ha estrenado más de 130 obras de diversos compositores y eso la hace ocupar un espacio muy importante en la escena de la música contemporánea. Sharon ha sido solista con numerosas orquestas y es miembro fundador del Gramercy Trio, del Kepler Quartet y de Marimolin, los ensambles con los que toca, y aparece regularmente con los Boston Artists Ensemble. Ella enseña en el Conservatorio de Boston y en Berklee College of Music y también ha sido parte de la planta docente de Brandeis University y de Michigan State University. También en los años 90 enseñó regularmente en el Conservatorio Bruckner de Linz, en Austria. Sharon tiene también una parte muy interesante en su perfil y es digamos, un foco que ella tiene en su manera de enseñar, orientado hacia la manera de tocar sin esfuerzo y en la prevención de lesiones. Y en ese sentido ha ayudado a muchísimos instrumentistas, a muchos intérpretes para prevenir, ¿no?, cosas como la tendinitis, los daños en los nervios y bueno, y distintas lesiones relacionadas con el ejercicio de tocar un instrumento. También Sharon ha trabajado como editora de música de cámara de la Sociedad Americana de Docentes de Cuerdas, y es la presidenta del Comité Nacional, y también presidenta del capítulo de Massachusetts, donde ella vive. También es fundadora y directora de Play On Inc., que es una organización sin ánimo de lucro dedicada a promover la participación activa en hacer música. También tiene un blog que se llama Just Tuning In, por si quieren visitarlo en algún momento. Esta entrevista que vamos a hacer hoy va a ser en inglés. Entonces, eso, vamos a estar hablando inglés, Sharon y yo. Sharon habla un poquito de español, eso nos ha contado, pero para que nos sintamos, para que ella también se sienta más cómoda, vamos a estar hablando en inglés. Sharon, welcome again. Thank you so much for being with us here in FestiQ-Artetos. We're so much looking forward to having you, to listening to you. And I'm just going to dive in with one question. When I think about your profile in this whole effortless playing and also this relationship to chamber music and to contemporary music, I wonder what sensations or feelings defined your first moments in music. And which of those sensations or feelings remain over the years now that you're a very renowned musician, and that you have studied so much and lived so much with the instrument and with the profession?
Okay, that's a fun question. By the way, I do want to encourage people to ask questions who are listening. So I just wanted to say that. Okay, I don't remember those first moments because, according to family legend, I used to sing along with the radio and records when I was in my crib before I even learned to speak, which I did at about 9 months of age. Um, but I began begging for a violin, begging for one when I was 4 years old. I would follow my mother around. I want to play the violin. It's so beautiful. Um, and it took almost 2 years for them to get me one. But I would say that the feelings, trying to remember back to that age, there was a feeling, an excitement, joy, curiosity, discovery. And I would say those things have all stayed with me. And there are times when sometimes it will flag a little, and then you have to figure out why and rediscover the joy of what you're doing, if that makes sense.
Sure. I ask you actually this question because our profession is a very demanding profession. We need to be very disciplined. We need to be very methodical, and we need to, just follow some kind of like guidelines to learn to conquer our instrument, but also to play according to certain traditions. So it can be, I mean, the risk is that it becomes a little bit rigid, and that's why I wanted to ask this question. How, in your experience as a teacher, also, how difficult is it to see or how easy it is to see that young students, young musicians, keep this excitement and this sense of discovery and this curiosity?
Okay, yeah. Well, that is by reminding them constantly why they're doing what they're doing. You could program the music into a machine and the notes will be there in the right time and in tune, depending on which tuning system you use on your machine. That's another completely different conversation. But the point is, what's in the imagination, getting them to sing it, getting them to think about how they imagine this music, and then use their technique, all the things they're worried about, to bring that to life. The technique is only there to serve the music. And I definitely emphasize that constantly in my teaching.
That is so important. And now that you talk about the technique, I just want to take this advantage of this to enter to this field of the effortless playing. This is so interesting because, of course, technique is something that we do with our bodies and with our brains, of course. So, in again, the demands of our profession often lead us to feel extremely stressed or worried or tense. And so I wonder, at what point did you start pursuing this path of searching for effortless playing and exploring the proper use of the body when playing?
Well, again, that's something that has been evolving my whole life. So I enjoy being in my body. Okay. I have always loved dancing, swimming, climbing trees, you name it, physical activity, just for the sheer joy, not just of moving, but of sort of creating movement and shapes in space. And if the violin didn't have that same quality, then something was wrong. Okay, and I had to figure out why. And they don't call it playing for nothing. I play the violin. I do not work the violin. Okay, and teaching, of course, made it necessary for me to learn how to express these ideas and observations so another person could understand what I was trying to get at. And everything I've ever done, it turns out, has fed into that. So, for example, I have been practicing Tai Chi for at least 30 years. And when my very first time doing Tai Chi, I was going through the class, and all of a sudden I realized, oh, this thing I'm feeling, it's just like the vibrations of the violin. They're identical. So this energy, it's just like the vibrations of the violin. And also the idea of eliminating conflict in the body and finding efficiency and generating energy rather than expending it. It's exactly the same as the violin. So I found that the minute I applied what I knew about violin playing to Tai Chi, my Tai Chi got a lot better. And then the thing about Tai Chi is it allows you to focus on those things without worrying. Am I in tune? Am I playing the right notes? Am I blah, blah, blah? So that you really can think about, well, there's certain principles I have decided I should think about when I think I'm trying to cultivate a sense of ease in the playing. But also I tango and I do slackline. That's really good for finding the ground, right? So they all feed into each other. After starting Tai Chi, my whole family learned how to unicycle. Don't ask, okay? But we all learned to unicycle. And I said, oh, unicycling is just like Tai Chi. So everything's the same. They're all the same. So anything you do that helps you in your awareness of your body, proprioception, where you are in space, how you're moving, can impact your playing in a positive way. Yeah, and I would say that the principles I deal with, there are a couple aspects. One is really that practice is really about heightening awareness, is developing your awareness and learning how to think. Because honestly, there's nothing about this that's difficult. But thinking and being aware of what you're doing is actually quite difficult, keeping control of your focus and your mind. And I would say that there are a lot of different levels in awareness. There's a rather superficial level of it looks like that. I would call that form. It looks like this. And as we know, we've seen great players from Heifetz to Oistrakh to you name it, who look very different one from the other, right? So form can take many aspects. Then there are mechanics. What do you do to make it look like that? I'm actually not terribly interested in form as a teacher, although it can tell me something about what's going wrong with someone. But mechanics are important and interesting. Then there's intention. Where do you initiate any activity? Where does that energy come from? And a lot of violinists, for sure, play from here. And they think their arms start here and everything comes up. So to me, that's extremely counterproductive. You want to initiate energy from the floor, really, and have a free flow through the body. And that, if you're a dancer and you don't understand that, you're in trouble. If you do Tai Chi, you can't do it. Things like that. That's what I mean. And then there's the idea of philosophy. Why do you do it that way? and then I would say the payoff for any discipline, whether it's intellectual, spiritual, artistic, is that there's some kind of emotional or spiritual result. And because we're artists and musicians, we start from there. We're lucky. We love music. But then we have to figure out all the other levels of awareness, how to make that really more accessible, that spiritual emotional center. And so I'm answering this question more in depth than you might have asked, but I'll keep going. So when
Please do.
so when I practice, the very first thing I do every day is just try to find my body and how its relationship to the instrument. So I deal with 4 principles. First of all is being grounded. In other words, feeling gravity, feeling my feet, If I had a floor inside my body, it must be as low as possible in my torso, not up here. Um, Staying open, which has to do with that internal floor. And if you're open, you can fill yourself with sound and really feel the vibrations of the instrument, changes your sound dramatically. Um, Feeling balanced. And I don't know what you've come across, but I'll see a lot of violinists who play like this, and everything's off to one side, and they're all contorted. And I like to really come straight into the middle and play right as I would stand normally talking to a person. So if I think about, and all these could take an hour to talk about, so we won't go there. But if you can cultivate those, then you're able to do the most important thing, which is to recognize and use release. In other words, if I'm playing and I get tense and I say, I stop playing and I go, oh, it might even just have been here. Or right there. And I feel like, wow, okay, I'm going to go do what I was doing again. Oh, there it started. I remember what the release felt like. So I'm going to go, I'm going to build the release into the playing, because it's all very well to say, relax, relax. How do you do that, right? What does that mean? So for me, it means cultivating a ground floor, like a basement, of being grounded, open, balanced, so I can use release. And that will keep me from building up tension and then finding myself in a very unpleasant place.
This is so interesting, Sharon, and I wanna elaborate a little bit on this question, because I mean the very fact that we talk about this, the very fact that we are discussing these principles and this matter of effortless playing, um, means that not everybody takes that into account. Means that not every teacher encourages this in their students. Means that not every player is fully aware of how the body works and this connection body and brain. So I'm wondering. So, in your opinion, is it something that is still lacking in instrument teaching, or do you think that it is already so widely spread of a topic? What's your perspective in this?
People have become much more aware of it. Um, the problems are, how do you approach this? Like I said, I've been thinking about this really my whole life. Um, and we tend to teach what we were taught. You teach what you know. This is a problem with repertoire too. Okay, that's another topic.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, and so I think, and people are really involved. I've done probably a little bit of almost everything. There's a big Alexander technique program at my school, for example. I like the Alexander technique. I think it's useful, but I love Tai Chi. So I don't bother with the Alexander technique, except the little bits, some of the things I learned when I was doing it that do elucidate very specific issues. I've done some Feldenkrais. I mean, there's just thing after thing after thing that is useful. And people are really into body mapping. And honestly, understanding how the machine works, you use it differently. All these things are important. But I do find that there's still a real lack of awareness overall, because people don't necessarily learn how to incorporate the principles into their practice. And we all have to discover that for ourselves. I was lucky, I had really great teachers, but none of them talked about this kind of stuff with me. And I got something different from each teacher. We all will, I hope, take and incorporate into our own approach to our art what speaks to us most from any master that we come in contact with, if that makes.
Absolutely. So now that we're talking about this, this is such an interesting topic. what do you think are the main faults that lead instrumentalists to develop injuries or simply like feel bad playing? What are the most common issues that you have
Okay.
encountered?
All right. I think there are two big ones. The first and the probably the most destructive is fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being wrong, and all this leads to tension, fight or flight, and it also takes our attention away from these more important issues like staying in the body, and keeping ourselves focused on how to use the bow to make something happen, using release, organizing your hand, all the things that help you stay calm, physically calm and collected. The other is desire. Okay. I want to be musical. I want to, no. Just let your, if you want it too much, sometimes that gets in the way. And don't want. Just, I don't know if that makes sense what I just said, but I see that a lot. People want it so badly. They want to express that everything comes up, and then everything gets squeezed and constricted in the playing. So, yeah, but mostly fear.
Yeah, yes, this is so interesting because the first one is is something that we are very aware of. And sadly, because there should be no fear in music making, right? We're doing a beautiful thing. It's not like like someone's gonna die if we make a mistake, when playing. But still, people are very afraid of mistakes or of not achieving what they want. But the second one, that is so interesting. This what you see, what you say, the excess of wanting something. Um, why do you think this happens? Where does this come from? This excess of will?
Okay, just a second. Though. Back onto the fear thing. Just one more thing I want to share, which is there is since has passed away, but a very, very great musician from Ghana, named Bernard Woma. He's a virtuoso Jill player. He was so famous there. We don't really have an equivalent here. Parliament couldn't open until Bernard showed up and played the Jill, okay, for any session. He always said, in music, no mistakes, just new styles. I love that. It's a very liberating thought. For us, it's not completely true, unfortunately, but still, that feeling and that thought is really great. The thing about the desire is that is a little bit of it's magical thinking. If I am expressive, if I'm expressive, it's going to come into the sound. Well, no, if you control your bow in a creative way, it'll come into the sound. And there's this. I love music. I love it so much that love and that desire to be musical actually takes you away from what you have to do to be the master of the moment, to be in charge of what's going on. And it also tends to make us a little bit into supplicants, like, I want it. And that will, again, bring the tension up in the body. So I like to have more. You should have fun when you're playing, which is also very relaxing, and enjoy the possibilities in the moment, rather than struggling to express like I am with my words right now.
That's so interesting, Sharon. Before we move a little bit onto another topic, I wanted to ask you about these connections that led you to think about these things, because you mentioned Tai Chi, you mentioned tango, you mentioned unicycle, so that's so interesting. And I want you to talk to us a little bit more about how these connections are made, because normally our profession as instrumentalists, not as musicians, because composers work in a completely different way, or even conductors, but many times when one plays an instrument, this becomes very normative. This becomes very, you have to do this, and you follow the advice of your teacher or your coach. And then I myself, as a teacher, as a player, find sometimes that we don't ask that many questions when we work with our body, with our instrument. But not only questions about the technique, but our intellectual development might be a little bit limited because of this very normative character of learning an instrument. So I would really like you to talk to us about the importance of intellectual development when being a performer, and how was it in your case? How this intellectual development led you to discover these other things?
Okay. Well, I grew up in a very high-powered academic family. And so asking questions and designing experiments and searching for answers was just a part of life. And I always argued with my teachers. I was always, if I didn't understand why something worked in one way, there had to be a way to find some kind of answer. But also the compartmentalization that's happened throughout the 20th century, I think, was very destructive to us as artists, because it took away that curiosity about connections between the sciences and the arts. The arts have been shunted off into a corner, even in education. It's not integrated into what's considered a fully educated person like it had been prior. Instrumentalists were just players. They stopped composing. Everyone has to write in their particular language as well as speak and read. Why not in music as well? So I actually think it was a very sad day for music when those things split. And honestly, I teach by asking a lot of questions too. You have to be thinking about what you're doing and why, rather than relying on, for example, you're playing a piece and you heard it 100 times, and what was the last most distorted performance you heard? And it's like a game of telephone. It just gets further and further and further away from the original score. And you have to remember that all the intellectual side of what we learn about theory and ear training, and that's only there, again, to serve you as an interpreter. It's not separated from your feelings. It's a little bit like, if you don't understand how pieces put together, if you don't recompose it for yourself, you're transliterating. So I can read Russian if it's written out, not in Cyrillic, if it's written in my alphabet, but I won't know what I'm saying, okay? Same, someone can recite a great speech, say, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to bear arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing in them to die, to sleep perhaps to dream. Doesn't mean anything, right? Or I could try to be expressive. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether. It doesn't make any sense. So you really must understand the language of what you're doing, not just, I'm playing this note. So I honestly believe that a highly developed intellectual curiosity is at the center of artistry. Is that answering your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's such a powerful message for us all. It's really so interesting, so refreshing to listen to this from coming from you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to move smoothly to another topic because you mentioned tango,
Oh,
and I know that you started the tango club of the Boston Conservatory and the Berklee School of Music, and I was wondering, what is it with tango that makes it interesting for you, and maybe if you can elaborate this connection between tango or dancing at all with music playing or with chamber music playing.
Yes, I will, because we did talk about it briefly before our session started. So I do love to dance, and I've been dancing tango for at least actually over a decade now, maybe 13, 14 years. Um, and I really love it. The thing about tango, Argentine tango, is that it is completely analogous to chamber music. So it's all about the communication between the two dancers. It is improvised in the moment and it is expressing the music. And the communication, the feeling of the motion is exquisite. And it's also what we get as chamber musicians if we're really cued into each other, trying to make your sound come out of the other person's instrument, really having them feel that you're deep inside what they're doing. And I think that for my students, I've actually used exercises I created out of tango when coaching chamber music, and they've been super effective. Like you have people, I remember one time I had a quartet, some of the best players in the school, really great players. And there was one 16th note passage in a classical quartet between the two violins, and they couldn't play it together. It was driving me nuts. So eventually I just had them stand up, stand back to back, so their backs were touching, and play. And then they were completely together because they were suddenly aware of the physicality of the motion. And I not only dance, I also am I'm an amateur dancer, let's face it, but I love it. And I'm an amateur artist, but I love to draw. And for me, all the arts are really the same, looked at like a sculpture looked at from a different angle. So when I draw, I see the line and then I move over it with the pencil. Or, so you're capturing a moment in time, you're capturing it in space, that motion that's there. And in dance, you're moving through time, shaping space, right? And in music, we're time artists. We're shaping time. That's what we're doing by affecting space. And so they all have a sense of motion. There's motion in everything. Time is somehow involved in everything. And as a chamber musician, that moving together that's so potent in dance should be present in chamber music. And chamber music, I think I said to you before, I believe is extremely intimate. It's extremely intimate. I mean, you're breathing each other's breath. You're trying to move through these shapes and phrases in complete agreement and accord and support and give and take. Anyway, that's the connection. That's why I like my students to feel that, experience it on some level, and then bring it into their music.
This is so lovely, and I want to go back to something that we discussed a little bit also before our session started when talking about this, and it's this element of physicality of moving of feeling, because we were discussing this. We are as chamber musicians, we're always very um, we're very sight oriented. We learn a lot to see each other, and this is very important. But I want you to talk to us about how these other sensations and is this other senses play also a part with regards to the importance we give to seeing, to watching.
Okay, yeah, we did talk about that, and I think in the context of different tools for coaching groups as a teacher. So because we are all, you always hear watch each other, watch each other. And of course, then there's always, watch the leader. My thing is, if you follow, you're going to be behind. That's what following is. You're late. So everyone has to lead. You might have someone initiating a pulse, and then you have to lead together, right? Otherwise, the poor person who's supposed to be leading is dragging everyone around. But one of the things I like to do to make people aware of the fact that the eye is often taking them away from what they need to be doing is put people in opposite corners of the room with their backs to each other. And the room can be very large. And then no talking, play. And some of them say, I don't know what to do. I can't. They say, put those antennae up and pay attention and play. And it's remarkable. They usually play better, at least after one or two attempts, than they did when they were just sitting in their formation and looking at each other. And I asked them, well, what was different? I said, I wasn't listening before. Right. Well, yeah, you weren't. And then there are other times when, to bring the idea of sight back in, I will make them get as close as possible to each other and stare each other right in the face. And honestly, I've never had a group that could do that without cracking up. They'd laugh and they feel really uncomfortable. But the funny part is, after getting them to do some simple dance improvisation exercises, mirroring, which is a simple one, one hand, even whole, whatever, do what your partner or leader is doing, then they can do it without any trouble at all. I once led a workshop where I just did dance improv, and it was at a big music thing. And what was so funny was there were about 75, 80 people there. It was really big for that kind of a workshop. And about 30 or 35 of them were high school kids in an ensemble who were at the festival. And afterwards, mostly the high school kids were coming up to me saying how much they enjoyed it and how they didn't think they would, but their teacher had made them come. And the most poignant was, one young person came up and said, my partner was my stand partner, and we never exchanged more than 2 words together. Now we're really good friends just after that hour. And so it was just so funny that we taking advantage of this different kinds of communication that don't require speech, and it can be really powerful and affect our playing to a great extent.
Absolutely,
Did that
absolutely.
answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. This is so nice to hear. Sharon, I would like now to move to another important aspect of your musical career and your musical life, and it is contemporary music.
Uh-huh.
And so, talking about your experience with contemporary music, um, how do you think this music speaks to the public, to the audience, in a world when there's such a proliferation of musical genres and cultural manifestations? This what we call contemporary music in the in the classical music
Sure.
within the classical music scene. What place does it have in such a diverse musical world?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and actually one I would want to think about for years. Um, but of course, music speaks to each individual in a way that's unique to them, any kind of music. And most importantly, it must engage the listener in some way. Physical, you move to the beat, whatever, emotional, spiritual, intellectual. It has to engage the listener. And I would say, in the development of classical music, Western art music by composers from the US, I often think of Aaron Copland's distress in the first half of the 20th century over how classical Western art music was becoming detached from everyday life. And so his answer was to search for a style that he dubbed imposed simplicity. Okay. And this style, which anyone who knows his music from things like Rodeo or the Violin Sonata, et cetera, um, it's extremely approachable, but it is not simplistic. And it's still thought provoking and somehow challenging while it's extremely listenable. And so it was in the 60s that there was a real movement among composers towards the obscure and the esoteric, with no concern over whether anyone would understand or even care about what they were doing, other than maybe other composers. And that really has changed again. Many composers from this present generation, um, even they started out as rock musicians or improvisers, or for example, like Steve Mackey is an electric guitarist. And there are people like Caroline Shaw, who writes very engaging, really, but intriguing music. And so they're not necessarily aspiring to be arcane, but they're drawing on their own experience and their immersion in their own culture. And of course, the world has become more interconnected, and we're constantly coming in contact with culture, other cultures, and other musics. And that's going to influence or flavor a composer's output very, very possibly. And, great. If that's what somehow gets into their imagination, I think that's great. But um, yeah, it's a funny time because of the interconnectedness and this incredible accessibility to art. Uh, I do think that the way art is being consumed is changing dramatically, and we don't really know what's going to happen. But I hope that there will always be a place for this sort of intimate and in-person exchange and sharing. And that is that's the place that you find. I think that speaking becomes the most powerful. I mean, you know what you like, but you like what you know. And with music, one of the problems is since it is a time art, you have to devote time to it to understand something new. You can't, in an art museum, you might walk past the pictures you don't care about 20 times, and suddenly they might catch your attention, and then you'll stop and get to know them a little bit and learn to like them. But you can't do that by listening to 1 second of some kind of contemporary language that you've never heard before. So they have to have a certain openness and willingness.
Yes. When we talk about this and when I listen to you, I can't help thinking about this tension between the the art that is made for others and the art that is made for myself, as a composer or as a writer or as a filmmaker, because there's always this tension, how much of what I do as a creator is oriented towards others liking it or others knowing it or others accepting it, and and these are aspect of I'm just gonna do pour my personality, my thoughts, my feelings on this piece of art. So I find this tension very interesting, and I would like to listen to your thoughts about this tension in contemporary Western art music, and also more beyond the intentions of a composer. How do we as performers deal with this tension?
Yeah. Uh, you said one thing that just triggered a thought in my head, which isn't really about this, but um, for yourself, for the audience, blah, 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 and the idea of tension. And again, if you go back to physicality and release, that's a way to be honest in what you're doing. And we have to, as performers, be being honest for ourselves. We can't be just trying to please somebody else, you know. And I actually prefer if someone either loves what I do or hates what I do, you know. That's as opposed to saying, "Well, that was nice," you know. But anyway, that was an aside. Let's see. So I'm gonna take this where I think maybe you meant it to go. Um, any piece I play, you're trying to get inside it and make it your own. Understand the composer, understand all the thought and feeling behind the piece, and then what does that mean to you, and then express that in an honest way. And if people are there to hear, one hopes they will be open. Now, you lived in Germany for a while, and I remember when I was at Darmstadt going to concerts, and as someone from the United States, being thrilled by the audience because they might hear a piece. I actually saw a fist fight break out over a piece in the balcony during a concert once. But for example, if they knew something was masterfully performed, they would give a standing ovation to the performer and boo the composer. Okay, so they had really strong feelings, but they were there to hear and to react. And they would react with great acceptance, sometimes with skepticism and sometimes with loathing. But that didn't keep them from wanting to come, because they wanted to be challenged and they wanted to hear. So a lot of that has to do with how we present things, how we engage the audience, how we get them to trust us. I mean, it's important for us as performers to bring before the audience pieces we think deserve to be heard. And they deserve to be heard and will be understood by at least someone if we understand them and present them in a way that's coherent. But it's, you know, the arts are an exploration, and they do challenge us, and they challenge our set beliefs and our comfort zone, and therefore expand our world. As a performer of new work, I'm always aware of that task of bringing the composer's imagination to fruition. And I love working directly with composers. And I realize too that I and my colleagues, when we premiere pieces, we're setting a precedent, a performance practice for that piece. So that's a lot of responsibility. I don't know. I don't know. Did I answer your question? I
Yes.
got lost in the midst of my
Absolutely.
thoughts there.
Absolutely. And then I want to take this ideas that you present to us to ask you precisely, in your experience with the preparation and performance of works by living composers, what is normally your relationship with the composer? I mean, what are your perspective as a performer of this living music?
Okay, well, it varies depending on the composer greatly. Someone like Gunther Schuller, I commissioned him a couple times, and he just brings you the piece and you play. Okay, Gunther, right? And then other people will bring you sketches, right, and ask for feedback and literally workshop things. Or they also, so one of the composers I've worked with a great deal, who is perhaps one of my favorite living composers, is someone named Scott Wheeler. And when he first started writing for me, we did a lot of that. And now my sound, I helped him really understand the violin because he doesn't play the violin. But also I know that my sound is in his head when he writes for me. So I know that that influence is there because he talks about it. I like composers to, as Nancy, my Marimolin partner, and I say when we commission someone, just follow the muse, what your own inner voice. We really don't want to dictate to people. I would say my deepest and most extended work with any composer was with Ben Johnston. And that was with Kepler Quartet, because Ben wrote the cycle of quartets. It's really extraordinary. If you don't know it, anybody listening out there, it's worth becoming acquainted with this music. He wrote in extended just intonation. So it's as if equal temperament had never been invented. And many of the quartets have above 180 pitches in the octave. One of them has over 1,200. It's infamous, but it's not arbitrary. It's all based on relationships that are generated from a harmonic, in an harmonic context. And when we were really, probably no one believed these pieces could be realized accurately before we started doing this. And it was an incredible journey and really completely changed my understanding of pitch. We worked through every single chord in every single piece with Ben before he died. And sometimes, since he'd never heard it before, because his writing was very much about the music, not, even though it's infused with unbelievable amount of technical theory and knowledge. It's all about the sound and the expression. And so sometimes he'd hear what he wrote and said, "That's wrong," and he would change it. That didn't happen that often, but it did happen. And like I said, it was an incredible labor of love. It took us 14 years to do this. But I love working with composers. It also changes your relationship to scores written by dead composers. You start to think about the written page in a different way when you're really able to communicate and ask all your questions with someone who wrote the piece. And I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, that's so interesting, Sharon. Thank you so much. Sharon, unfortunately our time is coming to an end, is running by, and I would like to ask you a last question in order to finish this lovely conversation that we have had. I want to ask you, when you think about the present and the future of this music that we call classical music, what do you think are the main things that we need to rethink? And what are the things that we should preserve?
Okay. What do you keep? You keep the music, the scholarship, the window that music gives us into a world from an earlier time, especially with a little scholarship thrown in there about performance practice and whatnot. What to retrieve that was lost, at least within Western art music to a great extent. Composing. I think we should all be composing. I compose. What to let go. My vote goes towards the extreme formality of the concert hall, the costumes, the silent comportment. And the costumes come from when we were servants in someone's court, right? That glass wall that's been put up between the performer and the audience. I really feel those don't fit well in our current society. And it serves to alienate a large section of the public, which is those who have not been indoctrinated into the conventions of the concert hall. And that's what the buzzword now, when I was younger, it was outreach. Now it's engagement, right? You cannot engage with someone when you're in different rooms as well, when there's a wall between you. And honestly, even in a restaurant, certainly in the United States, if someone's wearing a name tag, it says Linda. It doesn't say Mrs. Smith. there's a great informality that's really built into my culture, and I prefer a much more informal approach to concert giving, and that intimacy and immediacy that helps to cultivate. Um, and I have no idea what the future is going to look like. I really, really don't.
What would you like it to be? How would you like it to be? I mean, how would you like the classical music scene to look like in, I don't know, 30 years or in 50 years?
Well, I would like there to be it to be a part and parcel of every person's upbringing. That not that you not that there are the great classics which were dictated to us by a bunch of the first music historians were all German men, so of course those were the great but a more open-minded approach to music in terms of finding the beauty in it on its own terms. And of course, there's certain things that are more profound or more skillfully put together than others. And I think it's important to appreciate that. Doesn't mean it'll move you more. But I would like to see the arts more as a part of people's upbringing in the education system, which means there'll be more room for it in people's lives, whether they are making it themselves or going to hear it and share it with people, sitting in their living rooms playing chamber music. That's why I started that nonprofit, to encourage that kind of thing. I do think that virtual consumption of the arts will continue to grow, which means that actually individuals might be more empowered to share their art, not less. But I think it would be a shame if that. I'm sorry, when I was young, there was an advertisement for Ma Bell Telephone. Just reach out and touch someone. I'm sorry, a phone call, you're not actually there touching someone. So it was nice, but it's definitely a substitute. So my hope is that we continue to nurture avenues and venues for this kind of in-person sharing.
Thank you, Sharon. Such inspiring and important message for us today. Thank you so much, Sharon. I mean, it has been such a joy. It has been so pleasant and so interesting to have this conversation for you. It has been for me, and for sure for everyone who's watching this interview. Thank you so much for your generosity and your wisdom. And yes, I think all of the things that you talked about are very things that we have to keep in mind when thinking about our profession. And once more, it has been a delight to have you here with us in the festival. Thank you so much, and we hope to have you again soon in Colombia, maybe hopefully in the near future. That would be lovely.
I would love
Thank you so
that.
much.
Thank you so much. I learn every time I have these conversations, so it's good for me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. We wish you all the best from here, from Colombia, all the way to the US. Para todos, para todas los que nos han acompañado, les agradecemos muchísimo. Qué gusto poder conversar con una persona, un artista de esta talla como Sharon. Espero que ustedes lo hayan disfrutado tanto como yo. Y nuevamente, en nombre del Cuarteto Q-Arte, de todos quienes estamos detrás de la organización del Festival Internacional de Cuartetos de Cuerda, FestiQ-Artetos, les agradecemos mucho por haberse conectado, por ver esta entrevista, y los invitamos a seguir pendientes de la programación de FestiQ-Artetos en nuestra página web o en los perfiles de FestiQ-Artetos en Instagram y en Facebook, o en los perfiles del Cuarteto Q-Arte en las redes sociales. A todos muchísimas gracias y una feliz tarde. Que estén muy bien.